Before we begin, this is a podcast about terrorism, which does mean that we do talk about acts of terrorism and extreme violence, so you may find some of the following material upsetting. Hello, I'm Fatma Ahmed, your host and guide in this series of Taking Apart Terror, the West Africa edition. Together, we'll analyze the realities of violent extremism in West Africa and delve into the local, regional, and international efforts and initiatives to prevent and counter violent extremism. In today's episode, we'll be looking at who's tackling terror in the Lake Chad Basin. And joining me as we unpack this is Anna Sherburn, Deputy Head of CVE Unit at the Commonwealth Secretariat, and Samuel Ngambo, Executive Director for the Center of Promotion of Human Rights and Development in Africa. So let's get started. In this episode, we really want to learn more about what is being done to counter ISWAP in the Lake Chad Basin. And given that you're both practitioners working in this space, it would be great for you to share your thoughts to the listeners on what is being done to counter ISWAP in the Lake Chad Basin.
Yes, I think one point that we need to mention from the get-go is this understanding that has kind of evolved from the initial responses of local government in the region about this issue of violent extremism. It's been a relief to see how the response has evolved from being purely military to espouse whole of society approach to address the issue of violent extremism. Not only local government have refined the lenses through which they were seeing this phenomenon, also the international community has been integrating the whole of community approach in trying to address this issue of violent extremism. If you look, for instance, at the investment that has been made by the government of the United States through its main agencies, more notably OTI, the Office of Transition Initiatives, as well as USAID. They funded projects that are targeting different segments of societies in those different countries. For instance, in Cameroon, they've managed to fund a program that is looking specifically at social cohesion on the demand side of governance problems, but also working on the supply side by strengthening service delivery ability of local government. It's important to mention the causes of violent extremism in Lake Chad Basin varies greatly from what we've seen in other parts of the world, more specifically Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Most of the issues stem from ungoverned spaces and poor governance, among other things I should mention. So it's really refreshing to see that they've been programming aimed at addressing not only those ungoverned spaces, but also providing enough means to the local government, which oftentimes it's ill prepared to carry out even the most basic functions that it's supposed to have for the communities that it's supposed to serve, especially the rural communities. So the OTI intervention in the northern part of Cameroon, as well as Chad and Niger, definitely worked how to seize the windows of opportunities that were made possible by the relative stability that stem from the intervention of the Joint Multinational Task Force.
Just have to agree with almost everything that you've said. And I think in particular, over the past few years across the Lake Chad Basin, we've really seen the understanding of the problem with terrorism and the way that we need to respond to terrorism in this region, shifting from being a bit of a siloed problem with a lot of blame being levelled between different actors and different levels of government, a stronger understanding that this is a shared problem and a very exciting evolution in this real desire that we're seeing from across the region to try and understand what it is that's really causing and driving violent extremism. In particular, I really support the assessment that you made that there's this really strong interface in the Lake Chad Basin region between problems of development and problems of security. And of course, it's almost like a horrible knot between these two issues because poor governance and underdevelopment has created an opening for terrorist organizations to thrive in the past. But as a consequence, or as we move forward from that, the insecurity that is caused by terrorist operations in the region means that efforts to develop, to strengthen governance and respond to crises like climate change and COVID are undermined because there isn't the stability and security and the ability to plan for the long term that is needed. So all in all, it's a complex region, and the issues that drive terrorism in the Lake Chad Basin region are not the same as the issues that drive terrorism in other parts of the world. Nevertheless, I think it's been really fantastic to see partners from across the region and the world looking to examples from overseas of what has worked and what hasn't worked to try and shape the way that they want to move forward, as they're really trying to focus on integrating CVE and prevention of terrorism alongside just those military responses of countering terrorism that has already emerged. So it's a really positive time to be working in the region.
No, thank you both. And I think you've both really helped to showcase to the listeners of this evolving nature, moving away from just military responses, boots on the ground, to much more of a holistic process of being hyper-local in the context, understanding the challenges of the communities, whether it's deficits in governance, poor service delivery, whatever the systematic structural issues may be. It would be great to hear a bit more about some of the diversity and approaches. So for instance, in some of the PCV programming that you've worked on in the region, what type of individuals do you engage with? What kind of interventions are you focusing on?
I mean, one thing for sure, it's that working in this sphere, you get to experience lots of emotion. You get to work with a variety of people. At the forefront, really, of the effort to stem off progression of violent extremist ideology with community leaders. I mean, they play such an important role. And I think they were key in making different government understanding that this fight against radical ideology, it's asymmetrical. Strictly security lens would not help solving the problem, because at the core of the solution, it's the issue of collaboration between security forces and local communities that they serve. For instance, we've been working with community leaders in the northern part of Cameroon, providing them training on how to address potential conflict arising between herders or pastoralist communities and farmers. You have to understand, as Anna was pointing out a little bit earlier, is that there could be some old grievances which have always been addressed using specific community mediation practices that are being taken advantage of by radical or violent extremist organizations. And ISOP has been really good at taking advantage of old grievances. We often hear about pastoralist communities, how they are being used in this conflict by violent extremist organizations. Specifically for the northern part of Cameroon, it's the Kanuri people. There have been countless studies showing that the membership of some of the VEO's organization is made up of Kanuri. But that is not to say that organically Kanuri would like to join violent extremist organization. It's because it's people that is left quite vulnerable. If you look at that specific population, they span from the northern part of Cameroon, going through Nigeria all the way to Niger. And it's a community that has been disenfranchised. If you look at the Lake region, for instance, a decision by the government of Chad to vacate the islands in order to better address or better fight VEOs there has left the Kanuri even more vulnerable, because they were taken out of the ecosystem and moved to other places in Chad with no possible ways of gaining their livelihood. But more specifically, we lean on community leaders as entry points to the communities in order to define and understand what the needs of those communities were outside of the ecosystem. Village head, religious leaders have been instrumental in the outreach that we've had with those communities. And finally, another group that I would like to mention, which I believe oftentimes do not take enough credit for the work that the group does, journalists, basically. And we are working on the project with journalists to diffuse and reduce the effect of disinformation by fact-checking the information that is being provided to the community, because we understood that unlike misinformation, disinformation is basically a political tool that is being used by violent extremist organization. And I don't know if you've had a similar experience, but we've noticed that for the past 5 years, more and more, especially when COVID came around, we could see narrative about conspiracy theories that have been relayed by violent extremist organizations in order to try to enroll members of the community by using a false narrative to lure even more community members into their arms.
Completely agree. We've seen a lot of the conspiracy theories, and definitely COVID was just another example in the years-long, I think, trend of violent extremist organizations being quite flexible and responding to local crises and frustrations and grievances and problems in a way that will help them to try and attract and recruit more members. I think what I love about this conversation is that it really, I think for me, strengthens that so much of the work we do on PCVE is complementary but different. At the Commonwealth Secretariat, we've been working through our CVE program at a different level of the challenge, because our primary focus is to work with Commonwealth country governments, and in particular, in my case, working with the government of Cameroon to try and strengthen their ability and capacity and to implement PCVE strategy effectively inside Cameroon. As you described, there's this really strong desire, I think, to move away from a military solution only to a more holistic solution that integrates some of those challenges that people are feeling on the ground, including a lack of education, including not feeling like they have effective ways to resolve disputes and grievances within those communities. And also recognizing that sometimes the military solutions that have been put in place in the past, if they are heavy-handed, can have a very destructive effect on communities and can indeed create grievance against the government or the military themselves. So in the Commonwealth, we've been doing a lot of work with the government of Cameroon to try and help them to develop the instruments they need for systematic implementation of preventing and countering violent extremism measures within Cameroon. And through a lot of dialogue and discussion and partnership with different ministries within the government of Cameroon, we've been focused quite a lot on strengthening government's ability to work with young people and youth organisations, creating opportunities for women's leadership of PCVE, working with the government to try and make sure that they have the systems in place to govern PCVE policy and write PCVE policy in a way that they know what's going on, and they're being very systematic and structured in the way they're tackling this problem. Finally, going back to the point you were making about the power of disinformation, we've been doing a lot of work to understand how terrorists use the internet in the northern regions of Cameroon and in other parts of Commonwealth countries in Africa, so that countries are more able to effectively advocate or push some of these tech corporations to address terrorist use of the internet as it manifests on the ground. It's been a multifaceted approach, but I think it really demonstrates that as part of a whole of society approach to CVE, we really need to be doing this local work in specific communities with specific families about their specific problems. And we also need to be pulling back and working at that structural level on making sure that we've got the policies and the programs and that we are working in ways that are coordinated and trying to solve problems rather than allowing problems to kind of exacerbate themselves because we weren't paying close enough attention.
Thank you both. Really interesting. And I think complemented by what you both said is truly this whole of society approach, right? Which is, ensuring that we're working with communities and community leaders and those who are seen as credible within those communities where citizens reside in, but as well as this importance of building up the capacity and strengthening the government's ability to work with the youth. I'm interested in hearing more about your own experiences on engaging with religious leaders as well, because we often hear about this importance of social cohesion, working to improve cross-cultural understanding, working with interfaith, because we know groups like ISWAP and other violent extremist groups really exploit differences that may exist rather than similarities that people will have of different faith, and also ensuring much more understanding and acceptance. Can you touch a bit more about how do you work with interfaith and cross-cultural understanding, and why are they important to countering ISWAP and violent extremist groups?
In the Commonwealth, we have a fantastic program called Faith in the Commonwealth, which trains youth leaders and youth peace builders to facilitate discussion and dialogue between different faith communities within their home countries. We'll soon be launching an expanded program called Respect in the Commonwealth that takes that idea and also helps to facilitate discussion between communities whose point of difference may not be religion. But we ran this program in 2018 with just the most phenomenal group of young peace builders drawn from many different religious communities and many different regions of Cameroon. And one of the points that they kept emphasizing is that a real precursor to violent extremism is that discussion and dialogue shuts down. People start to think that if they don't agree with someone, that there is no way forward, that they can't get by with or deal with that person effectively. One of the really important lessons that we teach through the Faith in the Commonwealth program is emphasizing that there are lots of ways to disagree amicably. And in fact, that's something that we really emphasize in the Commonwealth. It's an organization or a collection of countries that make all of their decisions on consensus. And learning to disagree amicably is one of the bedrocks of the way that we move forward forward as an institution. So it's been a really important lesson for us. We've been working quite a lot at that grassroots level with young peace builders who have taken those lessons out to their local communities and just amazing outreach. And we've also been looking to encourage sort of structural reforms that will strengthen that capability to have those discussions about disagreement, about difference within our communities. And we'd love to see that to become a much more integrated part of the work that we do. So education ministers from across the Commonwealth recently agreed to a series of ideas about how we could better embed global citizenship principles into the way that we educate young people, and how we can teach young people to disagree respectfully, to advocate for their point of view, and to accept points of difference with other young people. So it's we've had some incredible achievements, but we still have a long way to go. But I think really one of the bedrocks of our work in building that social cohesion that you've described is we need to be able to accept points of difference between ourselves and our communities, and to find ways forward where we can accept and embrace those points of difference that will allow our communities to thrive.
Samuel, you do a lot of work through your organization on the promotion of human rights and development as well. Like, do you have any experiences as well in terms of this building on social cohesion amongst different communities?
Yes, and I wanted to come back a little bit to what Anna said about the efforts that they do with Young Peace Builder and all the efforts that the Commonwealth does on interfaith dialogue. I think all of those initiatives are really good. They need to promote moderate voice. So working to promote moderate voices, it's something that more and more it's taking hold in the Lake Chad region with that specific goal of amplifying moderate voices. And it did so by putting at the forefront imam, priest, other community leaders working to promote peace and tolerance by strengthening that positive local narrative, thus allowing the expansion of the access to information. And that was one key element, increasing the dialogue between different communities. In the northern part of Cameroon, for instance, there have been villages where communities realized that ISWAP would attack at specific days. So those communities came together and they said, okay, this is the problem that we are facing. We have those groups attacking us. So what we need to do is to create sort of self-defense groups whereby when the Muslims are actually going to prayer, we can guard their houses. And Muslims will do the same on Sundays when the Christian will go to attend mass service. So it's a great example on how interfaith communication and dialogue can be translated concretely, so to speak. And it's also a great example on how social cohesion can be built. In Niger, for instance, if you look at the DIFA region, through the Peace Promotion Project, we took aim at working to strengthen again those community relationships. One key element that we need not to forget when we're talking about community cohesion, it's the youth. For every problem, if we're looking at the solution, we need to include young, both boys and girls, just as we try to include women in discussing those issues. In Niger, youth were actually quite important in addressing those issues, because if you look at the herders, basically the herder heading the flocks from the pastoralist communities, they're young people, do not oftentimes have the temperance and patience of the ancient. So in order to address that issue, we had to revive the mechanism where young pastoralists and young farmers could sit together around tea and discuss about their different ways of life, because another issue threatening community cohesion in the DIFA region was the fact that communities were not talking to each other. There used to be market days where different communities would come together and discuss and exchange, but because of the repeated attacks of violent extremist organizations, market days have been disrupted to the point that whenever they are being held, people are just focused on coming and selling whatever they can sell and leave because they're afraid of attacks. One thing that we do at CPHDA, for instance, is for all of our assessment, all of our data collection, and more precisely, whenever we want to roll our community asset appraisals tool, we put the youth at the center of the process, because it's through them that we can have credible information, through them that we can know what are the different dynamics within the community, because they are the ones, first of all, who would feel the brunt of the negative action brought on by extremist organizations. They are the ones that are being affected by unemployment. They are the ones being affected by the lack of economic opportunities. Therefore, they should be the ones basically every program needs to focus on in terms of finding the solution to those different issues.
No, thank you both, Anna and Samuel. It's been so extremely comprehensive, really informative and grounded on some of the good practices that you're doing with the communities, with government and other stakeholders. And I think the messages were really loud and clear in terms of the importance of inclusive partnership and ensuring that there isn't one solution. In the next episode, we'll be asking, who's tackling terror online? Please follow or subscribe so you don't miss an episode. I'm Fatma Ahmed. Until next time, goodbye.